there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about knots. Today, we are going to do a deep dive into a subject that I think doesn't get talked about quite often enough in the right way. There are plenty of people who talk about knots and fly fishing. It's a huge theme in the sport generally, but it always gets talked about in sort of this odd, hyper-complicated, mostly unhelpful sort of way. And I don't think it has to be like that, to be perfectly honest with you. So we're going to talk about it today. I'm aware of the fact that we are talking on a podcast here, which means that you can't see the knots that I'm talking about, at least not directly. I can't show you here how to tie the knots, although there are a million tutorials online that you can use, and I'll send some of those your way in the show notes here so you can take a look at them. But that's okay too. I don't need to teach you how to tie the knots. I can just teach you a little bit about which knots I use when I'm out there on the water. And as with everything we talk about, these are my preferences. I have tested almost every knot known to man. They're not accidental preferences. They're not unfounded preferences. These are the knots that I trust every time I'm on the water, really regardless of which species I happen to be fishing for or where in the world I happen to be. But hey, if you want to do something different, you can totally do something different. There are other knots that work. These are just the ones that work the best for me and the ones that are simplest and the ones that I think make the most sense for a bunch of reasons that we're going to talk about here today. Before we jump into that, though, I do owe you all an apology for last week's episode. I was a little bit crunched to get that thing out the door. As you all know, I'm basically just a dirtbag fly fisherman with a day job, which means I am not a professional audio editor. And that means that if I'm in a hurry to get something edited and get it up, I might make mistakes. And there were several editing errors in last week's episode. At least one of you caught them and flagged them for me. Thank you for that. It has been fixed. So if you want to go back and hear my sultry voice without the errors, you can certainly do that. If you haven't had a chance to listen to last week's episode about what to do on the tough days, then I think it's worthwhile. And now you have a nice, clean audio file to listen to when you go back and do that. So thank you guys. I apologize for that, but I will do my best to avoid the errors in the future. Obviously with no promises because, as I said, I'm a fly fisherman and a political guy, not a professional podcast editor. But hey, that's okay. It's all part of the charm, right? It's the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast. We don't need it to be that polished. Also on the maintenance list is the ever-present request for you to engage with the podcast through reviews. If you are enjoying the podcast, if you are finding it helpful, if it's annoying you, if you're sharing it with friends, whatever, I would love to hear about it. Leaving reviews on Apple or Spotify or anywhere you listen is always appreciated and always helpful. It's definitely appreciated if you take time to write what you like or what you don't like so that I can adjust accordingly and make sure that the show is useful and fun for you guys, as well as being obviously fun for me, which is why I do it. But those are always great. They always help. So please keep those coming. And ditto with the messages. If you want to send me an email, you can always shoot me a note at backcountryflyfishingpodcast@gmail.com. You can also go find me on Instagram and shoot me a DM. I answer all of those. I'm sometimes a little bit slower than I would like to be because I get caught up with real life and other stuff, or sometimes because I'm fishing, to be honest. But I do read them all. I appreciate them all. There's been a ton of engagement this season already, which is awesome, and I'd love to see even more. So please keep those coming, and I'd be happy to chat with you if you are so inclined. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about knots. And let's start with sort of the problem with knots from a macro perspective. The problem with knots in fly fishing is not that they are too complicated. It's not that there are too many. It's not that they're hard to tie. It's not that they are a special skill that you need to have or have developed before you can fly fish. It's that they are overwhelming for people coming into the sport. There are so many different knots, and everybody has an opinion on which knot you ought to use. And many of them are easy to tie, but a lot of them are incredibly complicated to tie. And you're going to sit there, staring at your phone screen or a piece of paper with the instructions on it, flipping it upside down and flipping it back around and trying to figure out how the hell you're supposed to turn that into an actual knot. You can go watch tutorials online, but they're questionably helpful a lot of the time. And I think a lot of people would get into fly fishing or get further into fly fishing if they had a better understanding of knots and if knots weren't so damn overwhelming and intimidating to people. And that's really a bummer because I know so many people who, once you get them on the water, they can cast. They have a sense of which flies they want to use. They can play fish. They can land fish. They're really good anglers as far as the actual action of standing in a stream or in a lake and angling, but they can't tie their knots. And I can't tell you how many folks I've been fly fishing with who are really pretty good, but if they break off or if they lose a fly or something happens, they're going to come to me because they need me to tie the knot. Same thing if you're out with a guide. I've been on so many trips with guides where somebody in the group will want to change flies or whatever. And these are people who have been fishing in a lot of cases for decades. And they'll go over to the guide, and the guide dutifully cuts off the old flies, and he gets out and he ties the new knot for the people, and then he hands it back to them. And I find that wild because there is this sort of perceived barrier when it comes to knots and fly fishing that just doesn't have to exist. And you guys know me, my general refrain about fishing all the time is that it's not that complicated. Yes, there's a lot of stuff you have to know. Yes, there's a lot of room for growth. Yes, there's a lot of room to go as deep as you would like. But at a baseline level, it's really not all that complicated in any form or fashion. And that includes when it comes to your knots. And so I really think we got to get past this as a sport, as an industry, as anglers, as guides. There's just no reason for us to be walking around acting as if the tying of knots is some dark art that only a handful of special fishy wizards have, because that's bullshit. It's just not true. You don't need a bunch of fancy knots. It's not that hard. You can definitely do it. You don't need Frankie the guide to tie it for you. You can tie it your damn self. And we just got to get past that because I got to tell you, it drives me nuts because there are so many more complicated and harder and frankly more interesting things when it comes to fly fishing to talk about. We just don't need to spend time being stressed out and hiding under the covers about knots. So that's the baseline here. And here is my philosophy about knots. Number one, they've got to be strong, right? I have to trust them, which means that I have to believe that that knot is going to hold up to whatever I'm about to put it through. That could be playing a 20-inch rainbow in a quick-moving stream somewhere in a canyon. That could be a fish running downstream of me, and I got to haul him back up and trust that tippet knot not to break, usually in 5X. It could mean knowing that it's not going to be ripped or bitten through by a northern pike or another fish with big old teeth. It could mean that I expect it not to twist up or tangle or fail in another way. I've got to be able to trust the knot. And so knot integrity and knot strength matter to me out of the gate. But then the next thing that matters really as much as that is ease and speed of tying the knot. And the reason for that is I don't want to be standing on the side of a river for like 5 minutes tying a knot on a fly. I don't want to spend my time like that. It is inefficient. It's annoying. It takes time away from fishing because every second your flies aren't in the water is a second that you can't be catching a fish. And it's not something that I want to do. But beyond that, it also starts to affect your behavior, right? So if it's annoying for you to stop and tie knots, if the knots that you use are difficult for you, if you don't really know how to do it, if it takes you too long, if it's really finicky with small diameter tippet, whatever it might be, the truth is you're probably lazy because humans as a general rule are lazy and we don't like stopping and doing irritating things that take too long. And so the truth is if it's hard to do, not only is it annoying in general when you actually do it, but it's also probably something you're not going to do very often because you don't want to do something annoying, right? And so that starts to affect your behavior in some important ways, right? You could, for instance, not change flies for longer than you should because you don't want to tie the knots. You might not switch out your rig from a dry fly rig to a nymphing rig or a streamer rig because you can't be bothered to cut it off and retie everything and re-rig. You might be tempted to walk around or hike with your rod rigged so that you don't have to tie the knots in the field, which is an invitation for jamming into a tree or a rock or a dirt bank or whatever and breaking it. You could do a whole bunch of things that would not really be the best as far as practicality, efficiency, productivity, simply because you don't want to tie the damn knot. And I don't blame you for that. I feel the same way. And this is one of those things where micro adjustments matter, right? So even though it might only take you, let's say, a minute to tie a knot, a minute is a really long time, actually, to be standing there fiddling with something tiny in a river. And that can start to wear you down. So even if it's the difference between 30 seconds to tie a knot or a minute and 30 seconds to tie a knot, that's going to start affecting your behavior. And it's really good to be thinking about how you maximize that efficiency. And same thing goes when it comes to sort of the mechanical efficiency of this. And by that, I mean, you should never need a tool to tie a knot. Okay. Now, listen, I am accepting people who may have like arthritis or tremors or some type of medical thing going on that makes it hard for them to tie a knot. I'm not hating on you guys. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. So please don't take it that way. But for everybody else, you do not need a fancy knot tying tool from Orvis or from anybody else to tie these knots. And if you do need one of those tools to tie these knots, then you're probably tying the wrong knot. Because if you're tying the right knot, it is simple and fast enough that you would feel like an idiot reaching into your bag and pulling out a special knot tying tool to tie it when really you could just tie it with your Mark I fingers. So that's kind of where I come in. It's got to be strength and reliability and trust, but also speed, efficiency, and convenience. And I've spent a lot of years trying to work my way through all types of different knots, right? There's the trilene knot, there's the Orvis knot, there's the clinch knot, there's the improved clinch knot, there's the blood knot, there's the nail knot. There's all sorts of different knots. They all serve different purposes. Lots of people swear by the old standbys like the clinch knots, but I don't. I use a different set of knots entirely. And I'm going to say something here that is probably going to get me a bunch of hate mail because at least in the very nerdy world of fly fishermen, it is sort of a radical thing to say. But I believe that you only need to know how to tie 4 different knots ever to be a very successful fly fisherman anywhere in the world. Doesn't matter which type of fish you're fishing for, doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter what type of rod or line weight you're using, doesn't matter if you're throwing 12-inch streamers for saltwater fish, or if you're throwing 2-inch streamers for trout or tiny size 22 zebra midges in a tailwater. These knots will work in almost every situation. And that's why I use them. And I have used them all over the world, all over the country, in remote places, in tailwaters, in crowded places, with big fish, with little fish. They work. And I use them because I trust them. And so when I bring these to you, as I said, these are not just, blind opinions where I'm like, I read this online and it seems good. I have spent many, probably hundreds of hours of my life, if I'm being honest, tying and experimenting with various types of knots and learning which ones I like, learning which ones I don't like, and then putting into practice a system where I use the handful, and it really is just a handful of knots that I trust and that I want to keep putting on my line because I think they work and it doesn't need to be harder than that. So let's talk about these 4 knots. The first one, and this is the one that I use to tie on really everything for trout. And that includes dry flies. It includes nymphs. It includes sometimes small streamers. So think like small woolly bugger. But really almost anything that I'm going to throw on for trout in a normal scenario, I am going to tie on to my line with a Davy knot. And the Davy knot is incredible because it's brain dead simple. If you go online and look up how to tie a Davy knot, and this is important, not a double Davy knot. You don't really need a double Davy knot. You might occasionally put that onto a streamer because if that hook eye diameter is too thick, sometimes every now and then you could see some slippage of the Davy knot. So sometimes the double Davy knot works there. But in general, just a single Davy knot is really just sort of this weird modified couple of overhand knots that you're tying. And there are a couple different ways to tie it. You can either tie it the way that you'll find in the instructionals, or you can tie it like I do, which is sort of the same, but basically reversed because of the way that I like to do it. And I might see if I can post an Instagram video of how I tie that knot. But here's the thing. The Davy knot is super simple. Okay. There's no twisting involved like with the clinch knot. There's no wrapping involved like a clinch knot. There's no crazy turn here, turn there, go around the tree, go back through the hole as you might see with like a trilene knot or an Orvis knot. It is a very, very simple knot to tie, and it comes with some advantages. The first one being that it's super quick. Once you get good at this, once you figure out how to tie a Davy knot, you can tie one, no joke, in probably under 10 seconds. I mean, it does not take any time at all to tie on a Davy knot, which is why I use it. So going back to what we said before, there is a distinct difference between something that takes you a full minute to tie and you're finicking with it, as opposed to something that takes 10 seconds to tie on and then you're ready to rock. It makes you so much more flexible. That's thing one. Thing two is you don't waste a lot of tippet because of the way the Davy knot is tied. Once you get good at it, that tag end, you pretty much control how long the tag end is. So instead of cutting off, let's say, an inch every time you tie on a knot, or half an inch or a quarter inch or whatever, and shortening your terminal tippet, you're probably cutting off like 1/10 of an inch once you get good at it and kind of get the distances right. So you're saving a lot of tippet material there. That's a huge plus, because it saves you from having to re-rig later, which is a whole bunch more than just one knot. And then on top of that, the Davy knot is really small. And I mean, sometimes I'll post a picture of my flies on on the hook keeper or on one of the eyes or whatever. And somebody will say, man, what knot is that? It's so tiny. It's a Davy knot. The profile is tiny. And that does some really good things for you. Number one, it increases the stability of your dead drift because you don't have a big, weird knot jacking around with the behavior of the fly. But number two, I think it helps with fishing. I think the smaller that knot is, the more natural the flies look, and probably the more interested the fish will be. As with everything, I can't prove that, but that's my philosophy. I think if you were to tie a big old marble-sized knot on your flies, it might start messing with them because bugs don't look like that. But a little tiny Davy knot on the eye works fine. And so the Davy knot is my go-to. That is probably the knot that I tie 90% of the time that I'm out there. And I tie it onto the lead fly. I will then tie another Davy knot onto the bend of that hook, and then I'll run it down to another Davy knot onto my second fly. And that could be a dropper in a dry dropper rig. It could be a double dry. It could be a nymphing rig with 2 or 3 nymphs on it, but it's always Davy knots. And I will tell you, that knot has held up for me in situations that are insane. So think like 22-inch jumping fish that probably weigh, I don't know, 4-ish pounds, maybe 5, that are downstream of you in heavy current with 5X tippet, right? Which, yes, it requires some level of skill and you've got to play the fish right. And there's something to be said for how you fight the fish and tippet protection through the rod. But that knot almost never fails on me. I mean, I can probably count in all the thousands of days that I've been out there on one hand the number of times that a Davy knot has failed on me. And in those cases, I'm pretty sure it was my fault because I tied it wrong in a rush and pulled the tag in when I shouldn't have or something like that. So it's an incredibly versatile, easy knot. It should be your go-to knot whenever you're out there tying this stuff. It's definitely my go-to knot. Is it quite as strong as a clinch knot or improved clinch knot? Probably not mathematically, but it's functionally the same. I've never noticed a difference. And in fact, I think I've seen more clinch knots fail than I have Davy knots. And it's so much faster to tie that it's underappreciated. And in my book, at least for my fishing, it completely has replaced the traditional clinch knot and improved clinch knots that people like to tie onto their lines in these situations. So that's the Davy knot. That's knot number one. And the second knot is a uni knot. Now, everyone who fishes, whether you're a gear guy or a fly fisherman or a deep sea guy or whatever, pretty much everybody knows the uni knot. It is one of the most ubiquitous knots in fishing, and it is used all over the place. You can do it with 6 wraps and make it super duper strong and sturdy. You can do it with 2 or 3 and make it really small. But in any case, the uni knot is incredibly easy to tie. It's super easy to cinch. It's very strong, very reliable. You can probably put it onto your line in I would say 20 seconds, maybe 30 if you really needed to. And that one serves a very specific purpose. So the Davy knot is on the flies pretty much all the time. And in my rigs, I think I mentioned this to you guys before, but I run the tapered leader down to a 2mm tippet ring, a very small tippet ring. And then there are 2 knots attached to that tippet ring, right? One attaches the tippet end of the leader to the tippet ring, and the other attaches the terminal tippet to the tippet ring. And I tie 2 knots there. The first one is a uni knot. That is the knot that I use to connect the leader itself to the tippet ring. I usually tie it with about a 4-turn knot there, medium-ish strength without making it too big or bulky to the point where it might be annoying or get stuck or whatever. And then I tie a Davy knot to the same tippet ring and run that down to my flies. And the reason I do that is because the uni knot is objectively stronger than the Davy knot. And that's incredibly helpful because if you do break off, whether it's on a fish or a tree or a log or a rock or your friend or whatever, you want that bottom knot to break first, because if it breaks first, yeah, you'll lose your flies and your tippet and you're going to have to retie it. But if the upper knot, the leader knot, breaks first, then you're going to lose everything, including the tippet ring, and you have to do a complete re-rig and possibly change your leader depending on where it breaks. So the Davy knot really serves the purpose of being the slightly weaker working knot for fishing. And the uni knot is more or less a permanent knot in my leader that holds that tippet ring on it. And I will very often, because I don't change my leaders for different types of fishing. And I know there are people out there that say that I should. I don't think it matters. I've never thought it matters. Maybe one day I'll change my mind, but today I don't. I don't do that. So I'll very often take my leader, tie a uni knot onto the tippet ring, and I may not retie that knot, no shit, for 3 to 4 months, like an entire season. I have seasons where I never change my leader unless I get a wind knot in there, or there's some type of abrasion, or there's some reason I need to change it. I will very often not touch it again for months, like possibly dozens or even hundreds of days out there on the same uni knot, because it is that reliable. And so that knot will serve a lot of purposes for you. You don't need to tie it onto the flies themselves. That would be annoying and cumbersome and more complicated than it's worth. But using it as the initial connector to the tippet ring or to anything else that you want permanently attached to your line with a really strong knot, the uni knot is a perfect choice. So that's knot number 2. Knot number 3 is the perfection loop. And this knot is important for a few reasons. But the main one is this is the knot that most often you will be using to attach non-standard leaders. And by that, I mean leaders that don't come with a pre-tied loop at the end to do that handshake connection with your fly line, which also probably has a welded loop on it. These are mostly used for non-standard leaders to connect to your fly line. So think, for instance, if you were going fishing for northern pike, you're not going to use probably a tapered leader for that. You are probably going to use a level fluorocarbon leader for that. Same thing when I was in Mongolia fishing for taimen. We're not using tapered leaders because those fish don't care about tapered leaders, and we're not throwing little tiny flies. We're throwing big old pieces of meat and streamers that don't require that level of finesse or turnover or gentle. It just doesn't, none of it's gentle. You're just hucking meat into the water. And the way to connect those to your line is to tie a perfection loop. And a perfection loop is awesome because you can tie it with any diameter of line. You can tie it with incredibly thick 50-pound fluorocarbon stuff, which is hard to work with and kind of brittle and kind of inflexible. You can tie it with teeny tiny diameter, like 6X leader if you really want to. I don't think you should be using 6X leaders. Really, my philosophy is stick with 4 whenever you can, or even 3. But setting that aside, you can tie it with that. You could tie it with, you could probably tie this damn thing all the way down to 8X tippet. I don't know why you would ever do that, but you could. But it's an incredibly versatile knot. And once you tie it, if you tie it correctly, it's never, ever coming undone. I literally don't think that I have ever, in all of my travels and in all of my fishing, ever seen a perfection loop fail. I don't think that's ever happened. So it's an incredibly strong knot. It will hold up against, I've caught 50-inch pike on these knots and huge taimen and other stuff too. They hold up, and they are basically a permanent connecting feature to your fly line that is worth knowing how to tie for any time you're going to be using non-standard leaders in whatever situation you might find yourself in. So perfection loop, knot number 3. The 4th knot and the final knot that you need to know how to tie is the jam knot. And I want to be careful with this because there are actually several different types of jam knots out there. And sometimes people get confused by this. This knot I learned in a book about pike fishing by Barry Reynolds, who is a sort of legendary pike fly fishing guide. And it changed my life. I have shown it to guides in British Columbia. I've shown it to guides in Mongolia. I've shown it to people all over the place who are just blown away by how simple the knot is to tie, because it's honestly brain dead at a level that is like you almost laugh at it. But this knot is used to tie a loop into the terminal side of your leader. And so that would be the side that connects to your flies. And the reason that you want a loop there probably is because you are throwing a streamer. And streamers operate best when they are tied with sort of a loose knot, or a loose loop, I should say, rather than a tight, firm knot to the eye. And the reason for that is that the loop allows the streamer to sort of wobble a little bit more on the line. It lets it get more natural up and down head motion. It allows it to swing a little bit more freely and more convincingly and look like a living creature or an injured fish, which is what you're trying to imitate, or a leech or whatever else it happens to be. But you really want that loop to allow the streamer to work itself through the strip in a way that is going to trigger the strike. And loops are perfect for that. The problem is that often tying loops in those scenarios, you're going to be doing that for larger fish that have teeth, right? And fish that have teeth can bite through thin line, which is why we don't fish, for example, northern pike with normal trout leaders. You don't want to do that because they'll just rip through it with those big old nasty teeth and you'll lose your fish. So that sucks. So you might be doing this with a wire leader. I don't really believe in bite wire or wire leaders. We can do a whole episode about that at some point if there's any interest. I do think that they spook fish, even though pike and other really predatory fish are not terribly line shy. I think having a piece of obvious metal coming off of the fly is not super helpful. I catch more without doing it, but hey, you do you. Regardless, though, you're going to be using something heavy and thick. In my case, it's usually 30 to 40 pound fluorocarbon line, just straight level fluorocarbon. And that stuff, like I mentioned earlier, is pretty tough to work with, right? It's not very supple. It's not very flexible. It's not very bendy. It's a little bit, I hate to say brittle because it doesn't break. It just is, it's hard to work with any level of finesse, to be honest. And so you need a knot that can be tied simply. It doesn't require 15 different turns and you don't have to deal with this kind of annoying line and the stiffness of it. You just need something that you can do super simply. And the jam knot is the answer to that when you're trying to create a loop. And I will, again, maybe I can post a video of this for you, but you want to look up the jam knot from Barry Reynolds. I bet you can find it online. And if not, you can always check out his book, which is called Mastering Pike on the Fly. Definitely worth a read if you're interested in fishing for northern pike, which I'm going to go ahead and say it. I mean, if I could only fly fish for one species for the rest of my life, I would probably pick pike. They are so fun. And if you haven't done it, you really need to. It's incredible. But you want that version of this knot. And it is effectively just 2 overhand knots, which is insane. You tie one loose overhand knot into the leader itself. Then you tie another tighter overhand knot on the tag end. And then you put that lower knot through the gap in the upper knot and you sink it down. And what that does is it jams, thus the name, jam knot. It jams that terminal overhand knot into the overhand knot that you tied into the leader above it. And bada bing, bada boom, you have this ultra strong knot that creates a loop for your streamer. I have never seen that knot fail, not one time. Not on big fish, not on predatory fish, not on fish with teeth. Never, ever, ever have I seen it fail. And in fact, in a few cases where I've gotten it stuck on a tree or something in a drift boat, I have to cut the line because there's no way that I'm going to be able to get the flies back between the heavy tippet and the strength of that knot. You're either going to lose your rod or you're going to break your fly line or something bad's going to happen, but you have to actually cut it. It is incredibly strong, and it is my go-to for streamers of any size, especially for larger predatory fish. So there you go. Number 4, the Barry Reynolds jam knot. Add it to your arsenal. And that's it. Those are the 4 knots. We could talk about being able to tie a nail knot or a blood knot if you, for whatever reason, need to attach a leader to a piece of fly line. That could happen, but the truth is, in most cases, fly lines these days come almost universally with welded loops already on them. You can get away with just that perfection loop, which I mentioned earlier. You're probably never going to need to tie a blood knot or a nail knot. In fact, I can count on one hand the number of times I've ever had to do that, and they involved being way the hell off in the backcountry and having to either cut my fly line or breaking my fly line and then having to repair it in the field, which is not a bad skill to have, but is such an edge case that the vast majority of you are never going to have to worry about it. So if you've got some extra time, maybe there's a 5th knot there for you to practice with just in case. But the truth is, for most applications of modern fly fishing, you're not going to need it. You just need these 4 knots. And look, if you don't like these 4 knots for whatever reason, that's fine. Tell me about it. You can tie whatever knot you want. You can tie the most ridiculously complex thing that you need an Inspector Gadget arm to work if you want to. That's fine. You can fly fish however you want. But for me, I want it to be strong. I want to trust it. I don't want to overcomplicate it. I want to keep it simple. I want to keep it fast. I want to keep it efficient. And these are the knots that allow me to do that without making things into a mountain that they don't need to be. So there we are on knots, guys. I will do my best to post links to tying tutorials or information in the show notes. Also, if I can, I will figure out if I can demonstrate these knots somehow for an Instagram video for you guys so you can see specifically how I tie them. But in any case, you can go look them up, and it's not rocket science. It's not that hard. It's not going to boggle your mind. You can learn all 4 knots over the course of an afternoon, and once you know them, because they're so simple, they're going to be in your brain forever. And at that point, it's just muscle memory. You'll be able to tie these things in your sleep, and that will make you a better angler. So remember, guys, it's just fly fishing. It's not that complicated. You don't need to be scared of knots. Now, get out there, tie those knots, get those flies in the water, keep catching fish, and I'll see you back here next week. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. And I just hope you're not using a magnifying glass and tweezers.